every single week, minus the last 3 weeks. I was out of the country. So this is actually my first Inside Out this semester as well. So if it's yours, I just want to say welcome with you. I'm just so grateful to be here with you guys tonight. Over the last 3 weeks, I was actually on the other side of the world in Kenya for our mission trip here at North Point. It's called Mosaic. And North Point actually partners with a church and orphanage that's in Kenya that's located about 20 miles away from Nairobi in a small town called Juja. And we've had this relationship with this church and orphanage for about 12 years now. And it was all started by this guy right up here. His name is Bishop James. James is amazing. He actually came to America a few years ago. I could talk for hours and hours and hours about how amazing Bishop James is and what he has done for so many in that community. But what I'll say is that he is a father to the fatherless. He is an incredible example of what it means to be a man, an incredible example of what it means to love like Jesus, to be for his community. He's brought in dozens and dozens of children from all different types of backgrounds, and him and his wife have given them a place to belong to, a place to live, some food to eat. He's absolutely incredible. And every single year, we send a team over to Juja, halfway across the world, to strengthen our relationship, not only with Bishop James, but also strengthen our relationship with the kids in the home as well. And that's honestly one of my favorite parts, is seeing these kids grow up, knowing their stories and where they come from, how they live in an orphanage, but then now how they are living their life today because of this guy and God's faithfulness as well. And our team gets to do a whole lot of fun things during these 2 weeks while we're there, and I want to share a couple of the things that we got to do. The first thing that we got to do is we got to do this thing called home visits. We got to go to different places in the community. The guy in the orange shirt right here, his name is actually Pastor James, so it gets a little confusing. There's a Pastor James, and then there's a Bishop James. Pastor James takes us to different places in the community where he knows these people personally, and they come from a wide range of backgrounds and stories. We got to interact with people who are widows, people who have special needs, people who cannot provide food for themselves day in and day out. Maybe they have a big family and they cannot financially support themselves. And what we get to do is we get to meet these people, hear their story, and we also get to deliver a month's worth of food to them. Whatever their background is or whatever story they have, we get to be with them in those moments and bless them in that way. But if you ask anybody who went on the trip, they really bless us by just being with them and getting to hear their stories. It's one of my favorite parts of everything that we get to do over in Kenya. Make some noise if you were a part of Camp 75 this summer. Okay. One of the cool things we got to do is we actually got to take Camp 75 to Kenya, right? So this was so cool. This was really unique. We call it Camp 75 because of 75-minute camps all around Austin. It's probably called like Camp 200 over in Kenya because these camps were so long, but it was so fun because we got to lead camps of around 150 kids, not only our kiddos who are in the orphanage, but neighborhood kids as well. And we got to introduce them to who maybe Jesus is for the first time in their life, and we got to do a lot of fun things with them, sing the milkshake, give them t-shirts. So right now they can be repping Camp 75, Inside Out, all these fun things. It was awesome. We did 2 days worth of Camp 75. And then one of my favorite parts of the trip is we got to take our kiddos, our girls, and our guys in the orphanage, and we actually got to go to an outing with them. Think of it like a field trip. We got to go on a field trip with them because really their day-to-day schooling is they go to school and back to the orphanage. They go to school and back to the orphanage. That's kind of like their day-to-day rhythm. And so every single year we like to take them out and go see more of their country and go have fun with them. And this year it was awesome. We went to a lake and it was so beautiful. It was so amazing. But as we pull up in the buses, we pull up and we actually start to see that this lake, you can actually ride camels for just a few dollars. And we pull up and all the kids were screaming. They were like, let's go ride camels. This is going to be so fun. This is going to be amazing. And all of us who went on the trip, we were like, no way, we're going to ride some camels today. And it was so fun. And all the kiddos got on the camel and some of them loved it. Some of them hated it. They were screaming. They were laughing. They were having a good time. And then our team members got to go on the camels as well. I actually rode one with Blake Malden. He screamed like a little girl a little bit. Blake, wherever you're at, your mom liked that one. But that was super fun. But then we saw Bishop James kind of sitting off in the corner watching everybody else have like a good time and watch everybody else kind of ride the camels. And so what we did is we peer pressured him. And we were like, dude, you've got to ride the camels. And he's like, no, that's for the kiddos. That's for them. That's for you guys. Y'all have fun. And enough peer pressure will make him do pretty much anything. And so we were able to get him on the camel. So I actually rode a camel with Bishop James. And look at our faces real quick. To say we were nervous was an understatement. He was really, really nervous. He was screaming, he was laughing, and then the trainer, jockey, I don't even know what you call it, told the camel to go, and the camel actually started jogging. It was crazy. One of the wildest experiences ever. And I think Bishop behind me was praying. He was like, help me, Father, as we were kind of going around the camel. And I've never laughed so hard in my life. But these are memories, these are stories that I'll hold on to for a very, very long time. And I share all that just by saying, man, it was an incredible, incredible trip. I learned a lot. I grew a lot during the trip. But I share that because I'm just so grateful just to be back with you guys tonight. I love Inside Out. Inside Out changed my entire life over a decade ago. And I just love being around you guys every single week. And really what I'm doing tonight is I'm just continuing a conversation that both Jen Mazzola and Delaney had started over the last couple of weeks. And in this series, what we've been talking about is something that every single one of us will go through during the 4 years of high school. It's something we can't escape from. It's something that is prevalent, maybe really, really prevalent in your life right now, and especially over the last week, and it's this word, change. Change. This is something that if I had to say, just not only being a former high schooler, but working with high schoolers every single week, this is something that's maybe the most consistent in a high schooler's life, is that their life will change. And your life will change in a variety of ways. And some of you guys love that, and I would imagine that some of you guys may not like that too much as well. We talk about how sometimes our friendships can change, our values can change, our dreams, our hopes, our goals can change, especially during the 4 years of high school. And all of us over the last couple of days have went through just a pretty massive change. Freshmen, you changed schools. Maybe you've been hearing about this school for a long time, and then you walk into the doors and you're like, whoa, it's as bigger than I thought it would be. I don't know where to go. I don't know where to sit. Where are my friends? I have no idea. This is a big change that you guys just went through over the last couple of days. For some of you guys, maybe sophomore through senior, you're like, man, this year is going to be different than next year, right? Or this year is going to be different than last year. Maybe you're like, man, I have different classes, I have different friends in my classes, or I don't have any friends in my classes. And maybe there's some of you guys who want life to change a little bit. Like you're tired of how middle school went, or you're tired of how high school has gone so far, and you are hoping and you are praying that this year is different, that there is a change that happens this year. Maybe it's new friends, maybe it's new hobbies, maybe it's just new things that you get to do, right? And then there's some of you guys who, when we talk about this idea of change, your anxiety kind of rises just a little bit because you don't like the idea of your life changing. You don't like the idea of your friendships changing. You don't like the idea of taking new classes and trying to make new friends or whatever it may be. But the reality is that all of us, every single one of us, will go through change in our life because change is inevitable. It's going to happen. Maybe you've already experienced it. Maybe you love it. Maybe you hate it. Change is inevitable. And here at Inside Out, what we want to do is as you are navigating the change, we want to be a safe place for you to process that change, to maybe discover truths about the good that can come out of that change. But we want to create a safe space for you as you're navigating change in hobbies, friendships, values, whatever it may be. You have a place you can come to where it's a consistent place. We're here, and you guys can just grow and belong amidst the change. So what I want to do tonight, really, with my conversation, is I want to talk about one question that I think is maybe on the top of everybody's mind. If change is inevitable and if we're going to change as people, my question to you is, how can we actually change for the better? How can we change for the better? Because those are pretty much our two options, right? We can change for the better or we can change for the worse. Please do not raise your hand. Don't point at them. Don't nudge them if they're sitting next to you. How many of you guys, actually raise your hand, I want to know this. How many of you guys know of a friend who changed for all the wrong reasons? Okay. Put them down. Please don't look at them. Don't point at them. Okay. We all know somebody, inevitably in our life, who maybe changed for the wrong reasons or changed for the worse. Like they hopped into that relationship and they were acting one way beforehand, but once they're with her or once they're with him, they're just different, right? Maybe they've changed hobbies or interests or values, and you're like, man, you were living a pretty good life, but then you started doing these things, and it's not actually bringing the best out of you. For me personally, I just want you guys, if change is inevitable and we're going to change, I would want all of us, and I think you want this too. You want to change for the better, and I want you to change for the better as well. Another way to ask this question is, how do we actually start walking towards people that we want to be? right? This is a little bit of what Delaney talked about last week. But it's this idea of every single one of us has a future version of ourselves that we like to aspire to be, right? Whether that be a year from now, 4 years from now, maybe it's 10 years from now, but we have a future version of ourselves where if like we're being honest, that's the life I want to live. That's what I want for myself. That's the friendships, the values that I hold in my life. That's ultimately what I want for me. So really, I'm just going to be continuing the conversation of how do we get there? What does it look like to start walking towards the people that we ultimately want to be? In high school, we kind of run with a myth a little bit. We start to think, man, if I just do something new, like if I change something externally, everything will be fine. Like if I just play a new sport, or if I have new friends, if I just do something new, I'll be fine. And part of that is true. I would hope you know that maybe surrounding yourself with toxic people won't actually bring the best out of you. Maybe separating yourself from them, doing something new, changing friendships might actually be good for you and your mental health and your emotional health as well. Maybe playing a new sport, maybe it's time for that, right? Maybe getting a job, right? Like whatever it may be, we all have things where if like I can change this externally, and if I can do that, it actually will make me feel better internally. And that's not inherently wrong, but I actually don't think it's the best solution. Rather than starting with out here, starting with something externally, I want us to focus on internal things first. Maybe there is something we can change internally that actually will affect our lives externally. And I personally believe if we start here tonight, it changes everything about what you experienced during the 4 years of high school. It's the change that we ultimately want to see in our life. It's the change where I think all of us would say, I want a life that's more peaceful. I want a life that's more joyful. I want a life where my anxiety is lower. I want to start walking towards a life where I feel like I know who I am internally. All of us would want that, right? When we start with this internal thing, we can actually start walking and taking steps in that direction. Tonight what I want to do is I want to talk about our thoughts. Our thoughts. This is the thing that if we change internally, it can change everything about our life. Right? Here's something that I've kind of realized not only from high school, but also being on the other side of high schoolers every single week, is that the thoughts that we think affect the life that we live. The thoughts that we think affect the life that we ultimately live, right? The thoughts that we think, if we start to think negative thoughts, and I want to preface, it's not just about this happy-go-lucky type of thing, like, oh, it's all about self-positivity and self-love and all these things. That is one aspect. But sometimes when we think about the reality of the thoughts that we think affect the life that we live, the thoughts that we think about ourselves, other people, the thoughts that we think about God ultimately affect how we view ourselves, how we view other people, and how we view God as well. And maybe you've experienced this, right? The thoughts, not just the things you think every once in a while, but the things that have almost become core beliefs in your life. They affect your life more than you practically think. And I can spend hours and hours and hours talking about the thoughts you think about other people and the thoughts that you think about God. But tonight we got to start with you. We got to start with the thoughts that you think about yourself. A way to kind of ask this is, when you think about you, what do you think about? What do you think about when you think about you? You're at home at night, you're looking into the mirror. What are the thoughts that are the loudest? When you make an error in the game, when she says no, when you fail a test, what are the thoughts you think about yourself? When you do something good and you get rewarded for it, what are the thoughts that you think about yourself? See, the answer to this question is probably most influenced by the people around you. It's probably most influenced not only by your friends or the people around you, but it's also influenced by your family and your upbringing. It's also influenced by social media. It's influenced by the conversations that you have with one another. What do you think about when you think about you? And we'd like to say, oh, I don't really care what anybody thinks about me. Man, it's just they can say whatever they want about me and I don't care. If that's your posture, if I could push back just a little bit, I actually would say you probably do care more than you think about what other people think about you, right? And you can't carry that posture every single day. And I honestly think it might be unhealthy to say, oh, I don't care what other people think. Because the right opinion and the right perspective can change everything. And that's what I want to talk about for the rest of my time. So how can we not only think, but how can we actually start believing what is true about us, right? It's one thing to think it, but I want to talk about how we move our thoughts to our heart. How can we actually move forward in this direction and become people we ultimately want to be? And to do that, I want to talk about the Apostle Paul. Paul is somebody who lived in the first century, and he grew up as a Pharisee. Now, Pharisees were the religious leaders of the time, and they protected the law, the Jewish law, and they lived it out, and they kind of held this standard with everybody that they were around, right? And Paul is actually somebody who did not like Christians whatsoever, right? They thought Christianity was this weird, awful movement trying to go against the things that they are teaching their culture, right? And so Paul was responsible for actually persecuting Christians and actually leading Christians to their death. Like, we've got to stamp out this movement of Christianity so that the Pharisees and the Torah and the law could actually be held in a higher standard. He didn't like people who followed Jesus at all. And then one day, Paul stands face to face with the resurrected Jesus Christ. And Jesus looks at him and has an interaction with him and actually gives him something significant to do. And Paul believed in Jesus, and his life took a 180-degree turn, and he became one of the biggest influencers of Christianity for that very reason. And it just goes to show, before I go into my topic tonight, it goes to show how an interaction with Jesus can change everything. That an interaction with Jesus can happen to any individual, and it can change everything about that individual's life. And that's exactly what happened to Paul. And Paul writes about half of the New Testament, and he's writing to the church in Corinth. Now, if there's any church back in the first century that needs to change in the best of ways, because they're going down a really bad path, it's the church in Corinth. And so his words that he writes to the church in Corinth, what we call 1st and 2nd Corinthians, what we see is Paul giving encouragement to say, hey, there is a better way to live. And before I read the scripture tonight, I want you to know that there is a better way to live. And that's exactly what Paul is talking about in this moment. He says this to the church in Corinth, and he says this to you tonight. He says, we take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. I love this language because it's almost like wartime language. It's wartime energy. We take captive every single thought, and we make it obedient to Christ. I love this language and this imagery so much, right? Because we could just go throughout our day. We kind of think around 65,000 thoughts every single day. And sometimes when we think about the things that we're thinking about, we get confused about what we're thinking about, right? And it's hard to actually think about this in the right way of how we can actually capture our thoughts and hold them captive and then submit that and make it obedient to Christ. What this actually means is this, is that we need to compare what we think to what God says. The thoughts that are the loudest in your life, the thoughts that are weighing you down, the thoughts where you're like, man, I need to change this. This isn't actually what's true about me. We need to start comparing those thoughts to what God says about us. Because if it's true that God really is the creator of the whole universe, that means he created you and he knows you. And if he knows you, he loves you. And he's for you and not against you. And there's never a moment in this life where you're separated from his love when you place your faith in Jesus Christ. That's what's true. And if that's what's true, if he's really created you and he really loves you and Jesus himself says, hey, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, then we need to look at what he says. Because there we will discover what is actually true about us. And this is what it looks like. To take captive means asking the question of whose voice is that? Whose voice is that? When you look in the mirror at night and you're like, man, I'm not enough. You have that thought. Or I'm so lonely. Or nobody loves me. Or I'm so ugly. Whose voice is that? Who's influencing that thought? Is it the people at school? Is it your friend group? Is it your coaches? Is it your parents? Who's influencing the thoughts that are the loudest in your life? That's what taking your thoughts captive looks like. It's saying, man, whose voice is it? I like to think about it this way because I'm a big football fan. I only played 1 year and I was on C team. I was terrible at it. But I love watching football every single week, right? Think about it this way. A wide receiver's responsibility is to catch the football, right? They are on the field. Their responsibility is to catch the football, not drop the football. Their responsibility is not only to catch it, but to move downfield. Not just stay stagnant, but move downfield towards the better preferred result, which is a touchdown for them. If he drops the football, it's not going to look good for him, right? It not only he drops it, but let's say he catches it and then fumbles the football, man, he's going to be benched or something, right? Like he's got to get out of the game. What this means for us is there are thoughts being thrown at us every single day, every single hour, every single minute. The thoughts that are the loudest, Paul is encouraging you to catch it. Do not drop that thought. Take it captive. Catch the thought. And don't just put it off to the side and kind of numb it and neglect it. Catch the thought and hold on to it. And once you have it and once you hold on to it, we make it obedient to Christ, which means we have to replace lies with truth. It's this idea of saying, hey, this is the loudest thought that I'm feeling right now. If I set this up to what God says about me, I can start to see and compare what I think about myself to God's opinion of me. What I start to believe about myself to what God thinks about me, right? We start comparing those things and saying, God, what do you say about this thought? That feeling when I look in the mirror and I'm like, man, I'm so alone. What would God say about that? I'm so unlovable. What would God say about that? I have no worth. I have no value. What would God say about that? Sometimes we just go through the motions in life and we just catch the thought and then put the thought off to the side and just keep on keeping on, right? This is the power because it changes you from the inside out. When you start to catch these thoughts and say, well, what is actually true about me? Because what would a good, perfect Heavenly Father not only say about me, but when we start to compare the things, we start to see what God has done for us, that he demonstrated his love. He didn't just say, I love you. He demonstrated his love through his son, Jesus Christ. Capture the thought. Don't let it go. What does God say about that? So here's what I want you guys to do. Not only tonight, but this is something that I would encourage you guys to do this week as it's your first full week of school or whatever it may be. This is something that I would want you guys to do. Whatever the loudest thoughts in your life are, here's what I want you to do. I want you to, number one, take that thought captive. Take it captive. Catch it, right? Especially just, and really what this looks like is just acknowledging what are the loudest voices in your life. What are the loudest phrases? What are the loudest things that you're saying to yourself time after time after time? Again, take your thoughts captive. Once you have them captive, align your thoughts to what God's truth is. What does God say about the thought that you have in your life that's the loudest right now? What does God say? This is something you could do in your notes app on your phone. Is to write down the thought that's the loudest. I'm so lonely, I'm not enough. To discover what God says. Well, in Christ, you're more than enough. Once you place your faith in Jesus, there's never a moment in your life where you're separated from his love. What do you think, and how does it compare itself to what God says? And then here's maybe the most important thing. Repeat daily. Repeat it daily. This is how we start moving it from our head to our heart. When we start not only thinking what's true of us, but believing what is true of us, we have to say these things and believe these things daily. For me, there have been moments in my life where I've had the thought of, I am so lonely. Nobody loves me. I am not enough. Every single day, I have to tell myself what is true about me. Well, what's true about me is I'm a son of God. That Jesus really did die for me too. That God really loves me unconditionally. I'd put so many conditions on God's unconditional love. God really does love me unconditionally. There is nothing I have done or will do that can separate his love from me. That's what I have to tell myself every single morning. And when I start living from that place, I actually start walking towards a life that I want to live, a life that is more peaceful, a life that is more contentful, the life that I actually start to have compassion for myself, right? Which allows me to love and have compassion for other people better. It influences every aspect of our life. Take your thoughts captive, align those thoughts to what God says about you, and then repeat it daily. There's power when we choose to do this. I've been on the other side of students time after time again when they start moving from a place of thinking to believing what is actually true of them. But there was a story even this past couple of weeks when I was in Kenya where there are some identity statements being thrown around where I'm like, man, this is so amazing that somebody could have every justifiable reason to believe something about themselves. But because of what has been placed on them and what's true of them, they now are writing and living a different story. I want to share one of the stories from one of our orphans in the home. This kid's name is Raymond. This is Raymond right up here. Raymond is 15 years old. He loves taking pictures, and he's holding binoculars right there. We're at the Great Rift Valley. Raymond was brought into our home a few years ago, and this is Raymond's story. Raymond's story is one that I don't think any of us would envy, but it's something that gives us a clear handle of his life now and his story now. Raymond's parents were not expecting him. And so when he was born around 15 years ago, it was a surprise to them. And they were not in any shape or capacity to take care of him. And in fact, it was actually not even because they didn't have the things. It was actually because of a lack of trying that they were not able to raise him well. So they gave Raymond to his grandmother. And over a course of a couple of years, his grandmother did not take care of him, neglected him, didn't really care about his education, didn't really care about his food. And so when Raymond was old enough, he ran away from home. He ran away from his grandmother. He lived on the street in Kenya and Nairobi and Juja for a while. And then he went to the police station to tell, hey, this is my life, this is my story. The police took him in and brought him to Bishop James. And Bishop James has now given him a home over the last couple of years where he has a bed to sleep on and food every single day, a meal that he can eat. And now he has the opportunity to go to school, and his life is completely different because of his willingness and his boldness and his courage to find help in his life. Raymond has every justifiable reason, if he were to believe at 15 years old, the thoughts of, I am not enough and nobody loves me. The thoughts where the things that maybe we deal with time in and time out, time in and time again, the things where it's like, I'm just not enough. Nobody loves me. Nobody's for me. And if he said those things, it would be pretty understandable. If he believed those things about himself, I get it from the story that he shared. What's so amazing about this is Bishop James welcomed him into his home and gave him a brand new life and a community to surround himself with. And on our way to the camels, what was so unique is a couple of our team members heard this. Bishop James was telling everybody on the bus how proud he was of Raymond. And he looks at Raymond, he points at Raymond. Bishop James says this, he says, this is my son. I just want everybody to know that this is now my son. There is no blood relation between them. And what's so amazing about this statement is the pride in Bishop James's voice, saying, I know his past, I know what he's done, but when I see him, I see value and I see worth. And he is my son. That is something that is new and different because of him. And you could tell from this story, and you could tell from where Bishop James was saying this, that this is probably not the first time that he called Raymond his son. There's power when we start not only thinking, but believing what is true about us.